A consistent theme throughout all of One Piece is that of the symbol. The way that those who bear responsibility of some kind are thrust into a position where they must represent something so much bigger and more abstract than themselves, whether they want to or not. You can see this everywhere. Luffy becoming a symbol of hope and freedom, Joy Boy and Nika before him, Roger, Shanks, Buggy, Vivi, Garp, and many more. So many characters situate themselves in places of influence and find themselves becoming symbols for those who take stock of their legacy, for better or worse. At times, these symbols take great heed of their duty, and at others, they couldn't care less. But either way, One Piece is full of influential leaders whose actions cause a cascade of meaning that catapults them into being much more than individuals. But when it comes to this theme specifically, there is one character that in my opinion set the stage for how it would be explored through his sheer impact. And that is Edward Newgate, also known as the strongest man in the world, as Whitebeard, as father. Having grown up an orphan, Whitebeard knew better than the vast majority of what it meant to be powerless and unprotected, what it felt like to be without parental support, nurturing, and connection. And so having understood the profundity of that pain, after a stint as part of the Rocks Pirates, he took it upon himself in direct opposition to establish that he could be the one to ensure that others do not go through what he did, so that he could be father to the lost, a protector to the unprotected. And in so doing, he took it upon himself to create a home for him and his sons, the crew he formed, and he found the treasure that he was looking for all this time: a family. From then on, Whitebeard established himself with a torrential power. He gained his name, he became one of the 4 emperors of the sea, and he struck up an extremely close rivalry with Roger, one filled with a mutual respect such that he allowed one of his own crew, Kozuki Oden, to join Roger on his voyage. Roger soon died, and in that wake, Whitebeard was proclaimed to be the strongest. And as he gained all of this, he slowly but surely became a living legend and a monolithic example of what it meant to be the strongest. Wherever he walked, the earth quaked and people trembled, and yet, despite his fearsome reputation, he was more than anything a warm presence and a father to those he loved. He was strong of will, strong of heart, and the epitome of physical strength, with all those around him knowing his name and thinking of him as unflappable and invincible. His all-too-short presence in the story doubles as a highlight reel of some of the most epic and legendary moments in all of Shonen. And yet, none of those moments encapsulate what I take away from the character the most. My favorite scene of Whitebeard's is the smallest one that you can imagine, to contrast the enormity of Marineford and the man himself. It's the moment where, before declaring the final battle charge of his life, he takes a quick second, what I imagine to be a swift breath, so fast that you can blink and miss it. And it may seem silly to you, but this is actually what completed his character for me, and what solidified him as one of my favorite in the entire series. Because this little inhale tells us so much about the man. This is the side to Whitebeard that was as defining as the legend that all saw, and yet, very few, if any, actually saw this in-universe, by intentional choice or otherwise. This moment is representative of the fact that at the end of the day, Whitebeard was just a man, with weaknesses and vulnerabilities. It shows us the tiniest glimpse and window into the side of himself that he never let the world see, and from this we can see what he experienced painful day after painful day. This shows us how human he is, how big the burden of being the strongest is, and how heavy his legend weighs on his soul as he demonstrates the knowledge that the most he can afford in the midst of this tumultuous war is a quick breath before storming forward relentlessly. How many tiny breaths of exasperation has he had over the years, and how close does their sum come to properly representing his hardships? Not close at all by my reckoning. But again, it's a window. It shows us how big his duty is, how acutely aware he is of the knowledge that he can't show any weakness for 1 second because of the countless whose dreams and lives depend on him. What happens to the kids who look up to him to persevere if they realize that he is scared of all the things that they're scared of? In reality, that should imbue them with as much courage as anything else, but sometimes you have to be pragmatic. Maybe in the world that he inspires after his death, vulnerabilities will be things that symbols feel they can show. But at this point, not yet. I think that in this inhale we see fear, insecurity, and vulnerability in Whitebeard. All the things that the world never saw, that most would never talk about, and that the history books will never tackle. But in addition, I also see here his unbelievable determination to see things through regardless. This is the burden of strength in this series. Whitebeard took up the call to represent hope, the old guard, the values of his era, and all that he wanted to be. A father, a general, a captain, and a leader. He knew that he couldn't let himself be vulnerable, so he stood up for all that he wanted to defend. Through health problems, which he was interestingly all too happy to show the world for how little they deterred him comparatively. Through very human struggles, through heartache. Whitebeard was a man. But despite these insecurities, he propped himself up to be more than that for the sake of those he protected. He was strong not simply because of his feats, but because he strived past his weaknesses and didn't allow the world to see them on his way to those feats. And again, I don't believe this to be a blueprint of how to live, and I don't think that the series is saying that this is admirable for everyone to do. Shanks himself states how important it is to allow oneself to be weak. Luffy is our protagonist and the closest thing to a thesis for the themes of the series, and he has been weak multiple times. But with the world in a precarious state, Whitebeard felt that he couldn't allow himself to waver in the public eye. And who knows if he ever had a chance to confide in others about this. I wouldn't rule out Marco lending an ear, for instance, but regardless of whether or not he did divulge, I just know that his path was a lonely one. And yet, he never felt alone, and that fact is why he did it in the first place. But to me, in spite of the grand gestures, the incredible feats, the sweeping words, and everything else, this tiny moment just afforded this small panel and very little more is as defining of him as anything else. Or arguably more so, because I think it demonstrates his humanity, that while he is a legend and a symbol of fatherhood and strength and determination, he is also just a man. He had insecurities, doubts, worries. He forced himself to be something larger than he was because he had to, and it was difficult, excruciating, but he didn't do it because he was something more than a human. And that offers hope for all that are inspired by him, even if they don't quite know it. I think that Whitebeard's life was a struggle. The constant fighting, the need to protect, to represent, to not be vulnerable because it would shatter the perception of his strength. But within all of that, there was joy and love. And nonetheless, he took all of this on in the first place, and as such, he was free. He used his agency and freedom to do this because it was in service of who he was, his ideals, and the change that he wanted to see in the world. As the image of strength for not just what he was, but what he overcame to do it, with not a single coward's wound in battle, nor in life. Whitebeard is a reminder of the type of mentality regarding symbols that should be left in the past, that there is a human behind every symbol, full of much more complexity, nuance, and weakness than we are willing to think about sometimes. And since One Piece characters are so often larger than life, it's easy to forget that so many are often defined by such complexities. There is so much more to Luffy and Zoro and Shanks and Blackbeard and Emu than the history books and stories will divulge. And so, how lucky are we to be given a glimpse into who they truly, wholly are, time and time again. Many thanks for watching.